I think one of my charters is to try and just keep things organized. There's a lot of things regarding security to kind of talk about. And so I wanted to just kind of organize things by topic, because you can organize things by console, by technology. You could go at it from a licensing perspective. There's a lot of different ways to talk about all of this, but I thought we'd try and organize things by topic. So you're going to see us, trying to frame things as much as possible. I've got two introductory slides before we jump over to Greg that I just kind of wanted to brush through. And these, I think, are going to try and use throughout just from a talking perspective. If you've attended any of our webinars before, you'll see that we're commonly aligned to the NIST cybersecurity framework, which outlines essentially 5 large buckets where controls can be put in, and this includes people, process, and technology controls. Identifies typically about data and about trying to find out which data it is you're trying to secure. Protect is the bucket that a lot of people are very commonly associate with security, right? What controls am I going to put in place? Your antivirus, your malware, your firewalls, even some security controls that you're going to see today, a lot of them fall in the protect bucket, no doubt. Detect and respond are actually 2 buckets that oftentimes are put together. Detection is just pretty much anything that's generating an alert. If your malware or backup software console suddenly bleeps at you with an output, that's a detection, right? That's had a problem, and then you're going to go do something about it, and that's a response. And sometimes those responses are automated or not. This is where your ticketing might come in, things of that nature. And last is recovery. Ultimately, we can't protect from everything, and that kind of leads to the same model, NIST security framework. And I think the reason I like this model best is twofold. One is that the idea of prevention and reaction are equal here. We oftentimes see too many people putting too many eggs in the protect bucket. We try to protect, and that's logical. That's what we want to do. But inevitably, we cannot protect from everything, right? The CIA had a breach, Home Depot, and many others that, on a daily basis, we're seeing leaks from organizations that have many more resources potentially than we do to go after protection, and ultimately it fails, and therefore detection, response, and recover are equally important. So that's one reason. Also, detection's kind of at the heart of things here, and the ability to see when you're having a problem, I think are a couple of reasons why I like this model. So in any case, NIST cybersecurity framework is kind of one way we'll frame things. From a conceptual perspective. And the other one I like to put up there is the wheel. I don't necessarily, this is a security wheel that we had devised in an effort to have security conversations. I think the parts that I would just want you to point out, and I'll point them out as we're kind of chatting through some of the topics today, is that data is really at the heart of things here. It's your data that you're chartered to protect. I would say as part of the keyhole, if you will, here, that identity is a very strong part that cuts through a lot of layers. If you've got a great firewall, but you're leaving, default permissions, or if you've got a great security parameter, then identity is, if you're still leaving the default login and password to it, identity is certainly still a way to navigate around that. So it's something that cut through layers. But there's a number of layers of protections that you think about, your firewalls, things you're doing on your endpoints. And then around the perimeter are things like your policy or what compliance guidelines you might be underway. So that's kind of set the stage. I think the only other thing I would say there is that all of this Office 365 is a shared security model. You will see that Microsoft provides a lot of features and capabilities, and just because they provide them doesn't mean that you have taken advantage of them, right? So Microsoft's chartered to do some things, and you can hold their feet to the fire for what it is they're responsible for. Then they provide some things, and that's up to you to take advantage of them if you so fit. And then obviously outside of Microsoft's world, there's a lot of other protection mechanisms and third parties that might add value into this. So just kind of keep in mind that this is a shared responsibility model, and that's no better illustrated as we kind of get into our first section. I'll call it overall posturing. Now again, my charter in the PowerPoint is to kind of show things briefly, and then we're going to get to Greg and really kind of dancing around some consoles with some real experience as a good portion of this webinar. So from an overall posturing perspective, one tool that I think Greg's going to highlight just a little bit is Secure Score. So just kind of keep that in mind. Secure Score is a way to kind of look at the overall posture of your Office 365 environment. It's a tool that's included with Office 365. Again, you'll see it in the console. And a second thing I wanted to make mention of, and it's not for everyone, not everyone has a compliance need or directive in their organization, but certainly using the URL down below, every Office 365 tenant comes with something called Compliance Manager. And I'm going to do the luxury, I think, of showing Compliance Manager here on my desktop. Might as well show it just to kind of make it real, but let's get into that. Compliance Manager's goal is, again, included with Office 365. You can determine which default or which compliance standards you might want to adhere to. As you can see, you can add in different ones in this particular portal. There are 6 standards added in. And one of the things that's obvious as we kind of look over here for maybe GDPR, which has gotten a lot of recent attention. In fact, we had a webinar on it yesterday with a quick video up on our website if you'd like to kind of get a recap of that. But one of the things you're going to notice is under this GDPR standard, there are 626 actual controls that need to be put in place, or scores that you could attain. And right now I'm at a relatively low score relative to it because I'm in my shared responsibility model. I've got Microsoft managed actions and customer managed actions. And Microsoft, you can see, is doing their job, and you can kind of walk in there. But under customer managed actions, I haven't taken any looks. So let's go take a look in and just kind of see what this portal looks like quickly. Again, we're not here to show you how to do this as much as just show you what's available. So under the customer managed controls, I've got a number of things that are here. Think of this as a portal for managing any of the login activities or any of the activities around here. So there's a number of different controls here. You might look at response to, so again, this falls back to the NIST CyberSecurity. How do you respond to information security incidents? And what you can do is you can show evidence by uploading some documents as to how you do this. You could assign that to various users within your organization. You could choose a status for where you're at relative to this, and or an implementation date. So again, this is just kind of a portal for managing your compliance. If you have no other portal or don't want to use a spreadsheet or kind of find it to be an organizational item. With that, let's go back to the PowerPoint and kind of reorganize. I think our next step is to jump into what we call auditing. Okay, activity reporting. So this is a whole other group, and I think we've got six groups just to kind of keep you framed here. Activity reporting is extremely important. Activity reporting's goal is to find out, and this is mostly what's happening in the detect and respond areas. And some things that you might find in this space, which Greg will kind of show us more eloquently. You're going to see audit logs, okay, that are generated with Office 365 activities. Again, this is an included function, but as Greg will mention, not something that's turned on. You'll also see things called ways to make those logs kind of dance and sing, something called Cloud App Security, or what formerly was called Advanced Security, ways to surface activities that are occurring that you might not want to occur, or things that you might need to be alerted to. And so that's part of the detection world. And you've also got some capabilities to look at your current Active Directory and activities that might be occurring here. This is something called Advanced Threat Analytics. And this is looking actually at your on-prem Active Directory and trying to find activities that might be nefarious activities being done by poor actors, either accidentally or purposefully, to try and navigate around Active Directory controls. So this is a cloud-borne item, however it operates on your Active Directory locally. And last but not least, we have a system for taking these alerts from all these multiple systems, whether it be your Office 365, your Active Directory, um, log analytics from your firewall, basically taking all those logs and aggregating them together. We have a SIM as a service product called Alarm that we oftentimes leverage. So with that kind of as background relative to activity, let's take a look at Greg's screen, and Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about what we're going to walk through on the console.
Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Greg Nelson. I'm a cloud architect at Peters & Associates. And so what I'm going to do is walk through a little bit of a scenario that has come up more than once with different clients and historically within my career. So here I am as an administrator coming in to work in the morning, and all of a sudden I start seeing a lot of different emails where people think that something might be going on in the environment, right? So one of my customers or one of my users is telling me that it seems like something might be going wrong. Another one's saying, I'm not getting emails, something's going wrong. And now I need to figure out what the deal is, right? Luckily, I have a couple of users that are very open to communicate with me and provide me details, so it gives me some sense of things going on, as well as an alert that I've set up in the past to try to create some more information for myself. So one of the first things I'm going to do is go into that audit log search world in the Compliance Center. And I'm going to take a look for all the things happening for one of my users who are appropriately named compromised user. So when I'm doing a search for this user's results to see what might be going on in the environment, as I see some activities happen today where there was something that was changed on the person's mailbox by the user themselves, and it looks like they created a new rule. So right away I look at this and I can see that there's some odd behaviors going on in the environment for those two actions for that user's mailbox. Luckily I had also created an alert which was part of one of those items that Bruce mentioned, where with the Cloud App Security, I can create some new alerts and some alert actions so that when certain things happen in the environment, I get an alert that tells me, as an example, one user's mailbox has created a set of forwarding rules, and as with any demo, the wonderful beauty of delays and inevitable problems start to appear. So this email that was triggered with my severity alert that I created allows me to see that this particular user has now set up a mail redirect of messages. So this is going to be something that I'm going to want to dig into deeper. Clicking on Investigate will bring me back into the Compliance Center, and now I can take a look at what happened and what should have been maybe something I can do. So now I know I need to work with this user and maybe take some action on their redirection of email, and maybe do something so that that doesn't happen anymore, and figure out where that message is going and all the different mail that happened in the environment. So if I flip over to that particular user's environment right now, we can take a quick look at some of the different options that they've set up just to confirm or validate what might be going on already. So right away we see there's an inbox rule that was created that's moving all the messages to the notes folder. This has been a common occurrence that I've actually run into, and it's something that we need to keep track of, because now we see that all of the messages are in the wrong place. So they've still been receiving email, but it's going someplace that it's not supposed to. What else we've seen was that there was some forwarding set up. So if we check out real quick, we see that we're in a little bit of trouble, because now every single message that was sent to this user has been changed and forwarded out to a Gmail or an anonymous account. So now we have a loss of data. So there's quite a bit of concern of things that happened in this environment already. So now that we've discovered it and maybe taken some actions to fix it, there's some idea of what we might want to do to move on and go forward. And Bruce, stop me at any time when you want me to stop and move forward onto some more slides before we get too deep into other things.
No, I think this is good. Just keep the messaging going. Yep. We're within the activity reporting, and you're seeing some malicious activity, so what would you do?
Yep. So a couple other things that I would do now that we took a look at the search log and I seen that there were some different items taken, right? The set mailbox, and we went and cleaned that up for that user. What else I might want to take a look at is just seeing what login activities happened. Unfortunately, my audit log, my unified log, wasn't set up appropriately at the beginning of this whole problem. And so I don't see the ingestion of all of those different log entries right away. I only start seeing when the user was appropriately logging in at the beginning of their day, roughly 9 o'clock. I don't see the login before the problems happened, although I do see the IP address of where those problems came from. And I can go and search and find out that this IP came from Germany. My user does not live in Germany. So now I know that their credentials have been compromised. So there might be other actions I want to take, like resetting their password and maybe taking it a step further and investigating multi-factor authentication, which is another security remediation and control for protection that we would recommend and end up putting into place. But I want to take a look and just make sure that that happens. So there's audit logs in all the different applications in Office 365. The beauty of the Compliance Center, when it's set up appropriately, ends up being that it's a unified log for all of those areas. So for Azure Active Directory as a sign-ins, I can actually go and look at that audit log itself. And when I do that, I can see all the different logs that occurred for that user. So I've already taken the liberty of downloading this and filtering it. And I can see all of my logs for these different logins. And I see some logins from maybe Rome, from Germany. There's a lot of different random logins instead of the logins that should have been seen for this particular user. So I can start to make some pretty safe assumptions that this user maybe provided their credentials somewhere else and started to share that information. So as I said, maybe next step I want to do is at a minimum reset this person's password or block them from logging in. But now I also want to start taking a look at what else this user might have sent out or what else might be causing me some problems. So going back to my Compliance Center, I end up having a single pane of glass almost for all the tools I need. So here I have the message trace, so I can start to do a message trace and find out what messages were sent by this user out to everyone in the environment or even out to the internet. So I can see that this user sent one of my other users a message saying, please click this link. Luckily, my user already informed me of this one, but now I know at least some of the subject of what was being sent out that I could start to try to do a search for and clean up, or at least start taking some action to advise people on what they might need to do next. So I see that this message was pretty malicious, and what's amazing is when I click on it, it's protected. It doesn't get blocked by any of my other tool sets, whether it's advanced threat protection or anything like that at the moment. So luckily the user provided it to me. I see what's happening. It's a basic form that was created in Google. Someone is just looking to farm these pieces of information. So I can take some action right now. I know that I was already blocking some of these URLs and links. I can block this particular link and take that action to make sure that going forward, this link will never be safe. And I can prevent any of my other users from falling for it at the moment. If I go back into my message trace, I know that I have that trace. That's great, but that only does so much for me. Now I've identified there's a problem. I've reset the user's password. I've tried to prevent any other users of falling for this problem. Now I want to prevent that user from, if they were to fall for this trick again, what can I do to make sure that they don't log into those problems? And what can I do to prevent them from sharing sensitive information? So let's start with the sensitive information. One of the possible ways that we can help prevent some of this is with data loss prevention. So we want to make sure that we have a policy in place for data loss prevention to make sure that any of the potential information we could share, whether it's social security number, financial information, etc., is being blocked and some actions being taken to prevent it from being shared out with the internet unless we want it to. So we know that we have a policy but maybe we want to take action at this point to review it and make sure it's doing all the things we want it to, or maybe we want to start to tweak it a little bit to be more restricted or doing more broad searches so that we're blocking more messages or blocking more sensitive data from being released out to the environment. So another thing that I can start looking at is the different ways that I can implement additional authentication methods so that it's not just username and password. Because this username and password, as we've seen with this form that was created, they might give out their username and password, but maybe they won't be able to give out that next authentication method. So multi-factor authentication allows us to do a number of things. One of them being that we can have it call their phone number and request that they log in. So if I were to try logging in right now as my administrator account, who has already been protected, I should end up getting a prompt to log in. Unfortunately, I've got one of my users already logged in. That's goodness. So let me sign out as him really quick. While I'm doing this, I'll just really quick and see if there's questions. And there's not. All right. So here I'm going to
no questions, but certainly a good scenario. We've had I think I put that in the IM window, but for those that didn't see, we've been doing these things called security, Office 365 security health checks. And within, let's just give the percentage of maybe 35–40% of the mailboxes that we've been looking at, or the customer accounts that we've been looking at, have had active mailbox compromises going on. Things like Greg is showing specifically where people, especially in the finance area, are having messages go to subfolders, right? They're looking, the rules typically are looking for things like, hey, this looks to be spam, or it looks like a fish, or things like that. Those notifications have special rules where they get really buried so people don't get notified. And what we are seeing is outbound messages, kind of as Greg is showing, oftentimes saying, oh, by the way, our payment plans have changed and now send your money here. This industry term is called business email compromise. So a great example that a lot of organizations should be aware of here. Thanks, Greg. Keep going.
Bruce. So as you guys hopefully seen there, I logged in with my username and password, and then I went to a screen where it was waiting for it to approve it from a phone call. So it called my phone. I was able to validate that I'm actually trying to log in, and then it let me into the environment. So this can be a control that we can put in place for all of the users to make sure that at that point we are protecting the environment further. So while we're here, I'm going to go into our admin center, and what I'm going to do is reset this user's password to make sure that they're going to be forced to change it, and then we also know that that bad actor, that bad user, is no longer going to be able to make any changes. So I'm going to go ahead and reset that. And also, if I scroll down, I can see that there's multi-factor authentication that I can enable for a user. So there's a number of different ways that we can leverage multi-factor authentication, and it all depends on different licensing and controls. And this is usually where we can help navigate some of that discussion. So we already see that multi-factor authentication is enabled for some of the users in my environment, but not for the one that got compromised, unfortunately. So I can easily enable it. Now, doing this means that it is required 100% of the time. They're always going to need to authenticate with the multiple authentication methods. Depending on leveling up, there's different flexibility. So basic one is required 100% of the time. We can move up into some advanced Active Directory controls where we can now trust specific IPs. So we can say trust everything coming from the on-premises corporate environment. And we can even take it a step further with what's called conditional access, and we can create some rules around specific controls, whether it's coming from a mobile device, whether it's coming from particular groups of users, particular users, whether it's coming from a Mac OS or a Windows OS, and we can determine what action should happen, should it be blocked or allowed. So there's 3 different levels of flexibility with multi-factor authentication, but at a minimum, it's going to be on 100% of the time. if you enable it per user, like we just did for our compromised user. So that ends up being a high level of a quick scenario and what we end up walking through and some of the different ways to find it. Bruce, I can go through a number of other things, but this is what I had highlighted at least for this portion.
Oh, I think that's perfect. That's you covered a big topic which I was thinking about, which was the email portion along with activity. So we started there in the activity, and you saw some nefarious activity, and then you went in and used some of the tools that were available within the email section to kind of close those out. One of the other sections that I think was important to discuss was data as a whole. And again, we're kind of moving quickly because our goal here is not a how-to, really, it's really to just kind of envision some of the possibilities. Now, data, as you recall, maybe from the security wheel, is one of those things, it's right at the heart of things. And you know, it's your crown jewels of your organization. You probably have to determine which stuff is the really important stuff because, again, we can't protect everything, might be some of your mentality. And so, I'll kind of quickly brush through some scenarios, and then we'll give back to Greg to kind of show us how to make some of this real, or where we could make some of this real, or how Microsoft implements it. But one of the things is data classification, right? Is literally at a document level, or an Excel spreadsheet, or PowerPoints, or PDFs, or whatever. Basically, the idea of connotating that some of these items have different levels of classification, right? Internal, confidential, secret, not restricted, personal. Again, those are up to you, kind of determine what they are. You can use some default branding there, and then how is this done, right? So, you know, Greg will kind of show you some things about labeling and items like that, but one way would be to have your users do it, right? And I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best way, but certainly users could move this within Word and simply touch on secret on their word bar up there, and boom, this document suddenly has a secret label attached to it, which might mean a number of things that Greg can walk you through. Another way is to kind of reclassify. So maybe a document was labeled as secret by user Josie, but then Frank comes along and he wants to relabel it, and he'd just have to provide some justification. Yet another way is to have a recommended. Hey, I looked at this document, and because it contains X amount of social security numbers or credit card numbers, I'm going to recommend you do it this way. So again, the user is just being prompted to choose wisely. And yet, an even better way, potentially, is to actually automatically classify the documents based on what it contains, right? Have an engine and or an AI-based engine either go over the Office 365 documents or even documents in file shares to provide some of this classification. So those are all some capabilities. Obviously, GDPR is kind of one of the areas, and I'd kind of point out there's two specific things for those that know nothing about the GDPR standard. There's two areas that in our webinar yesterday we tried to focus on. One was on something called data subject requests, which are things you might be getting now that we've passed the May 25th deadline. This is where the end user actually says, okay, show me my data within your systems, right? Well, now it's your choice, or it's your obligation to go find that data should you have any EU data within your systems. And sometimes it's difficult to find that data, right? What if you don't have things classified yet, or you don't have a searching mechanism? So data subject requests is particularly important. Obviously, the other one, which I think we're all here discussing today, is how do we prevent breaches, and how do we notify and have a detection when things are happening. So those were the two major elements of yesterday's webinar, and it's kind of relevant and timely, I thought, for today's discussion. The other area which I'm kind of breeze through relatively quickly, certainly Greg can give you some highlights, is e-discovery, right? There's an e-discovery capability not only to find data, but also, you know, after you've done some classification, which might be one part of it, there's also capabilities to provide retention periods. How long do I want to keep data? And how do I then surface that data out of multitude of systems, right? Whether it be out of your Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Skype, or other. There's also capabilities to, you know, not only preserve the data with retention, but to find the data with search. Maybe analyze the data, and that's there's a specific tool that I'll mention, I think, in the next slide, and then review or output that data as part of your audit or legal process maybe IT is involved in this today because IT needs to be, but certainly this is a process that could be moved into other departments. In terms of analysis, Microsoft also has added in, and again, this is a licensing discussion, but there's something called advanced e-discovery, which really helps in the analysis of the data. For example, you could find what they call near duplicates and email threads and sort of reduce documents by, if they're really similar documents, maybe you don't want to review as much, because I don't know if anyone knew this, but lawyers and legal review of documents is expensive, right? So if you can reduce, with using some tools, the number of documents people have to review, you're ultimately saving costs. And furthermore, if you can give them some, BI type dashboard tools to kind of look at what's been reduced, which ones have unique inclusive copies, better reporting effectively, you can really give them some confidence as to what it is they're looking at and have them not necessarily looking for words, but maybe patterns of words. So these are all parts of the advanced email aspects and data that maybe, Greg, you can dance us around data and labels a little bit and kind of where that fits, and then maybe cover quickly the retention and e-discovery portions.
Sure thing. So let me just share my screen out here for you folks one more time. And what we'll do first is we'll just start with labels. There's two different types of labels that exist in the Office 365 environment. And unfortunately, they haven't been merged yet, although the discussions about merging them have been happening since Ignite. So hopefully at some point this year it still gets accomplished. So what we'll do is we'll start with the Security and Compliance Center first. And there's labels that we can create here, and there's label policies that we can apply to content. So the labels that we create in the Security and Compliance Center really have more to do with retention than anything else. So we can create different types of retention policies that would be labels that can be applied to data, and that can be applied automatically with a policy or can be applied by the end user when they create the documents or if they send them and they apply them. So to give you an idea, I have this delete label that exists out here, and what it does is it will not retain content. So it sets it to retain it but not retain it, and it deletes it if it's older than 1 day. So really it expires anything that's set for delete or with the delete label, and it will delete it after 1 day. So we can create a list of these different labels that apply different retention models to whatever document or email receives that label. Now, how we can apply the labels would be with label policies themselves. So if we create a label policy, we can apply it to particular locations and determine what should happen, if at all, anything. So we're applying it to all locations, and in this situation, we're just applying the ability to have the delete label available to all of those different locations. But we can just as easily set it up so that in a particular location, it's happening based on the detection of sensitive information, as an example. So we can apply conditions for retention to say if it finds when it's scanning any particular set of sensitive information, whether it's credit card, social security number, bank routing, anything that we apply or create as a sensitive type of information, at that point, actions can be taken on that information. So this becomes more prevalent in SharePoint than anything else, as it can scan data at rest, but it also can be applied in motion for exchange email messages. Now, one of the other things that was shown in some of the pictures had to do with more of the labels that would appear inside of Word documents that can also apply different types of formatting. So within Azure's Information Protection Suite, there's the ability for you to create labels that can be applied to documents that can also apply formatting as well as some other protection. So here is one that we created called Confidential Protection. And so what it's going to do here is it's going to create it as a red label that would appear in the Word documents. It's going to protect it so that only people within the organization can ever open it. And then it's going to set it up so that there's a header, a footer, and a watermark that will all say confidential. So these are some pretty interesting ways that we can also start to make things happen within Word documents with labels so that we can apply different footers, headers, and also retention policies. So we can apply these rules based on conditions as well, similar to what we've seen before. So we can choose the different type of information types or phrases or look for particular words. So if we wanted to create formatting and apply protection in a different way rather than just a retention model, we can use these types of labels to make that happen. Now, if I go back into our Security and Compliance Center, there's also different retention models that we can apply into the environment underneath our data governance. We can create a retention policy so that we can look for particular types of data and make sure that it's protected for a period of time. So this would mean that if someone were to try to delete the message, things like that, in their mailbox, it would be transparent to them. Everything would always be happening, but we'd still be able to do an e-discovery against that deleted data for however long we've retained or created a retention policy for. So we can apply these retention policies to really anywhere in Office 365. As you can see, the SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, 365 groups, sites, and even Exchange public folders. Some of the Office 365 and Skype segments have a little bit of caveats to them on what they can actually do for some of the protection, but it all pretty much works where it can preserve the data at rest or what it finds. One of the things that you see here is this thing called preservation lock. And where this comes into play is for a lot of regulatory requirements where it says, if you created this, we want to make sure that no one ever adjusted it, that you didn't try to trick the system or things like that. So turning on preservation lock, which is a PowerShell command, means that after you created this policy, that policy can no longer be adjusted to be a lesser amount of data or changed to the protection of data. So you can always increase it to make it more, but you can never decrease it, and you can never really change what data is being protected. So depending on your requirements, this may be something that needs to be turned on. But these are good ways to replace what have historically been in place holds in Exchange. The retention policies are good ways to make sure that you're protecting data and can be somewhat of an alternative to backup in the sense that you have a protection because now you're holding on and preserving data even after it's been deleted by an end user. So there's a recoverability aspect to some of these retention models that would exist.
One of the terms they use there, Greg, is the immutable database, right? The legal and audit staff want to know that this data hasn't been tampered with and that indeed a 7-year retention period is a 7-year retention period. So preservation lock sounds like the ability to continue to make sure that there's an immutable database of data that they're looking across.
Yep, that's absolutely right. I try to stay away from legal and
oh yeah,
kind of the
I play one on TV.
I'm not those, yeah, but absolutely true. So while I'm here, just to give you an idea, since we've stepped into somewhat of the idea of regulation, there's some financial institutes that have created a requirement to do percentage analytics of mail, to say that they've captured a percentage of all mail. They're doing a scan of it, making sure there's not like insider trading, etc. The supervision section allows that to happen. So here we can create supervision policies that will look for messages for whatever we set it up for, and it can be a percentage of all the mail that would have been sent in and out of the environment, only in the environment. We have different options available for all of that. And then that will be stored in kind of like an e-discovery mailbox. It's a separate supervisory mailbox that we can give someone access to for review. So while we've been in here, we talk about regulatory requirements. Supervision is one of them, and this is how we can accomplish it. I've worked with a couple of clients that have accomplished this or utilized this. It works pretty well for what they have the requirement for.
And Greg, while you're there, I know e-discovery is a big part of in being able to find messaging. GDPR has the data service requests that I had mentioned earlier, which some organizations might be starting to get some data service requests like, help me find the data within my data set. And obviously e-discovery it might be the tool to do it. However, Microsoft created, as you're pointing to right there, a GDPR dashboard. Can you walk us through what the capabilities are there?
Absolutely, yeah. So as Bruce is kind of mentioning, historically you've been able to do like Freedom of Information Act requests or any litigation requests through e-discovery, and it would seem that GDPR data requests for sensitive information or personal information would just fall in line with that. However, to make sure that we're separating the data and meeting the kind of legal requirements for that, Microsoft did a great job of separating it out so that it calls out what is defined in GDPR as the data subject request requirement. So the dashboard itself just walks through a number of different toolbars and how to easily view what's going on in the environment. But the data subject request section is actually where we can create a new case. And here we can create new data subject request case, and we can look for the data for the particular person. So whoever requested the data, etc. And then we can look for whatever data we want to after we create the case. So once we've created the case, we can look for all of the data. And then what this does is pretty much takes us into the eDiscovery search world to create the search and the case information. What the difference between the data subject request and eDiscovery is kind of just an organizational and logical separation between the two. So it's defined separately, and it can be easy to organize the difference between the two. So once we're inside of the eDiscovery content search world, we can create our search, and we can even do data exports as required. I skipped through that quickly just so I can show you the similarity when I go back and look at the eDiscovery world for search and investigation. So if I go into content search, when this comes up, you'll notice it looks very similar to that same world we were in. I have a search and an export option. I can create new searches for any sets of keywords, look in different areas, do what I would need to do. I can see the results, and I can export the results. The fantastic problem that occurs here is that export results out to any set of PSTs or zip files, whatever have you, that export option isn't available by default, right? This is an extra privilege that needs to be granted to the administrator or whoever is going to be managing this role set. So by default, all you really have is the export report option, which just gives you kind of a quick dump out of what data is there and basically the status of all the different information. Turning on that privilege takes roughly about an hour for it to be fully effective, and you would need to log out and back in. I want to bring it up because it's an important thing that's come up in the past, and it's one of those little tricks that over time we've become very accustomed to. But when I've talked to end clients and things like that, it's a question that comes up pretty regularly, and I at least want to give you guys a quick view into that, as well as just let you know that that's what can happen. So what we can do is we can export out data results once we have that full data set or option, and then we have that available. What else I can show you here is in the eDiscovery world itself, we can create actual cases. So if you notice, there's not really an option here for me to delete the data that's in there. I can delete cases because now I've given myself higher privileges, but I can go into each case, look at the data, be able to pull it. When I open this case, you'll notice this looks exactly like the DSR setup. So I'll just flip over to DSR. I have home, search, and export. In my eDiscovery, I have home, hold, search, and export. The difference being is I can put data on hold, or sort of a preservation lock, if you will, in a sense, on top of being able to do a search and export for it. So if I didn't have my own retention policy, now when I create this eDiscovery search, whether it's for litigation reasons or otherwise, I can put that data on hold, so if it was accidentally deleted by users and tried to be purged, I can still discover it and find it for however long I set this hold up for. So that's the big difference between the DSR world and the eDiscovery world.
Perfect, Greg. Yeah, that's, I mean, the eDiscovery and GDPR or DSR, those are two separate worlds, often managed by two separate people. And I think that's a helpful, way to kind of differentiate the two. We've covered a lot of the items that were in email. I think, Greg, I would have you go back or I guess there's nothing really to show, I think, relative to advanced threat protection. Certainly, I'll add a few nuggets in. Advanced threat protection is an add-on to the typical spam and antivirus capabilities that you get with Office 365. Today you have something called Office Message, what's it called? You basically get antivirus and anti-spam included as part of Exchange Online Protection. But one of the things you're going to note on the as I kind of point this out, is that typical flow through Exchange Online Protection is something that goes on a daily basis today. If you've added in Advanced Threat Protection, another thing you get is then zero-day threats. It takes a look at attachments that maybe it doesn't have a signature for. Oftentimes this occurs with new variants that occur, usually within the first couple hours, first 8 hours. People will generate a ton of variants from an existing one, and it'll take those unknown variants and send it over as a safe attachment, and basically blow it up it'll spin up an Azure tenant or spin up an Azure box, blow up the file, and take a look at its behavior, and basically determine if this is doing damage or not, and then if it's safe, it passes it on. So essentially, it's a protection level that's above and beyond normal protection level for attachments. Additionally, it also has the capability to look at all the URLs that might be dropped in on people's emails, whether it be signatures, their Twitter, whether it be a link that they're being directed to. All of these things are evaluated in a database that Microsoft has for their safety, and continued to either they continue to monitor that site to verify that the site is not being done by a known spammer or by a known hacktivist, if you will, and keeping the links safe for your organization also. So safe attachments, safe links, I think are two nice parts of advanced threat protection. They also have some anti-phishing capabilities in there. So we'll just kind of, I don't think there's a need to show that, and Greg, you've already shown the data loss prevention, so we'll go through that. One area I'd love to show with the balance of time, I guess, are twofold. One is, and I don't think there's much to show here, so again, we'll keep this one at the PowerPoint, but from a data perspective, which I think is a whole other topic, I'm sorry, from an application perspective, there's capabilities within Microsoft's products to protect applications. We oftentimes leverage something called mobile application management. This is either an included portion of your Office 365, or there is an enhanced part that's part of another licensing SKU, but its general goal is to take applications and essentially monitor them beyond your borders. So on mobile devices, for an example, if you were to open something in Outlook, that Excel or Word application is sort of works in a protected way, in that it's unable to, let's say, copy into a personal app, or unable to save to personal storage, but it would be capable of storing to storage that you approve of, such as OneDrive, but it wouldn't be able to store to Box, things of that nature. So it's basically a way to containerize the application on a mobile device. So we found that helpful. I think that's just a repeat, yes. And then another way to kind of do application management is something called Cloud App Security. Greg, if you could show a little bit on Cloud App Security. This is, Cloud App Security is kind of twofold at this point. It can actually monitor and manage, again, activities, I think, which is something Greg showed earlier. Manage activities within applications that you know about, such as OneDrive, SharePoint, all the Office 365 applications, or there is a capability to have some capabilities for applications you might not know about, things known as shadow IT, things that are cloud applications or SaaS apps that your organization is likely using. I think the industry stat is that the average user has 12 to 14 cloud applications they're leveraging on a daily basis, oftentimes without knowledge or approval of IT. And maybe, Greg, if you could show us some of Cloud App Security's capabilities to monitor and manage applications. I think this is a kind of a new frontier for a lot of people, and people might not know that Microsoft has a application security broker.
Sure. So what I can do first here is just give you an idea of what that advanced threat protection might do, not necessarily for an attachment, but at least for the URL. So before we knew that I was getting bad messages sent out to this stolen data Gmail address, this guy now found out about my other user, and he sent that bad link to them. When that user goes to click on it now, because we blocked it, they're being told this website's been blocked. So they get this bad page, and it's preventing them from logging into that page. So just to give you an idea of that advanced threat protection, how that would look, how that works, that would be that situation there. So luckily, we've taken a new action and been able to protect our users from doing anything different. So going into the cloud app security tool set, there's a number of different things that we have available to us, and by default, the first thing we have is this world of investigation and control so that we can create new alerts. So one of the things that we had created was a set of alerts that tells us what's going on based on all the different activities, and one of them being if there's unusual user activity, and one of those having been that forwarding rule being occurred, which created a rule set for me to send an alert. There's a lot of different things that we can accomplish in here, one of them being a discovery. So we can pull data in from our cloud app world, so we can pull in reports from any number of different appliances, and we can get a sense of what all the different mail or the web traffic is that's going on in the environment, so we know where people are going. So this is one way we can identify what are those different shadow IT applications and what people are going to. From there, once we get it, we can go through and investigate what's going on in the environment. So here's just our Office 365 sense of things that are going on, and this looks very similar to our audit log, because in fact it is. So we're pulling in that same unified audit log into the cloud app security world to get a sense of what's going on in the environment. So if we pulled in our other firewall logs or anything else and we started being able to do analysis against that, we can get a better sense of all the different applications that are going on or what people are logging into, and then we can get an analysis of those different things that we should apply. So from a control perspective, we can now take this a step further, and we can build rule sets around using file share applications that would have been like Dropbox. Maybe we don't want to use Dropbox. Maybe we want to use just OneDrive. Maybe we don't want to have people sharing to external domains. So here we can create all the different types of alerts and controls to either A, prevent people from going out to those sites now that we know about them, or B, at least identifying it so an alert and an email gets sent out to the administrators or to someone when those things happen. So as an example, here's a new risky app alert. So when it's happening, it looks for what would be classified by Microsoft and its alerts for anyone doing daily traffic more than 50 megs, and as long as there's more than 50 people hitting it. So we can adjust this to say we have a small environment. Maybe it's as soon as 5 people start using it, we know it's going to blow up. I want to know about it sooner than that. So we can start making some adjustments for that to try to become more aware of what's going on in the environment in multiple different ways.
Perfect.
So the alerts themselves, we can see what's going on in the environment based on what alerts were hit. So we see that, hey, there was an alert from a Tor IP address, so it looks like it's coming from a browser that's trying to either proxy through multiple different places, etc. So we know that that might be something bad. Here's that alert that was the different rule change so that there's forwarding set up. And, oh, look, there's somebody that logged in again from somewhere that they haven't logged in from regularly. So there's some things now that we can see are going on, and we can take actions to resolve that, distance it, or make sure that we've taken care of it, and now we don't see those alerts anymore. Once we've resolved and dismissed these, they can start pinging again. If they're pinged, it's similar to System Center in a sense, where if there's already one, it's not always going to be pinging you until it's been resolved and it knows that you've taken action to fix it, and if new problems occur, they are in fact new problems. So real quickly, those are some of those high-level aspects of what can happen with these and how we can take some action.
Perfect. Yeah, we obviously put that under app, but that equally could be activity, right? What activities are people doing? Either way, which was kind of the first topic that we had talked about. So that was important to show. And just to kind of wrap things up, I know that we had under the identity area, we had already covered conditional access earlier. So this was when Greg was kind of walking through and turning on multi-factor authentication. He turned it on with the idea that, hey, it's going to be on all the time for this user, meaning every time they launch an application, it's going to be looking for multi-factor authentication. There's certainly capabilities to add in something called conditional access, which is something that's going to look a little bit at the state of things, as indicated on the screen here, location, device state, and other conditions to kind of make sure that you're in a condition that you actually care about. Maybe you don't care about when people are at the office, only outside of the office to make them MFA. There's also capabilities to kind of add in a risk score relative to their ID as to how that is. So these are just some nice add-ins that can be accentuate your MFA experience, if you will, and kind of make it stronger. I would point out that Peters & Associates has a pretty deep experience with the MFA. We're seeing a lot of customers that are under this active email compromises look to MFA implementations for their organization. We kind of have a turnkey process for that, for doing not only the MFA implementation and kind of solving some of the complexities you might get there. As you saw with Greg, it's relatively easy to kind of flip a switch and turn it on. However, if you want to use conditional access, or if you want to validate that the experience is going to be good in all situations, in the office, out of the office, on a Mac, on a PC, for different applications, whether they be web-based or desktop-based, those are all situations that are going to need to be tested and have a little bit of strength and strategy around. In addition, we've got a turnkey process for really kind of looking at your Office 365 on a health check basis. There's about 44 parameters we look at. Greg showed a few of those today in terms of turning on audit logs and making sure things like that are on, turning on or turning off POP3 and IMAP and some other things that are just not great default security practices. So those 44 items we check in the health check. We tend to solve those in remediation. People tend to want to do the multi-factor authentication usually at the conclusion of that. Then we have an ongoing service called the weekly Office 365 security check. So that we, not you, is actually taking on the responsibility for making sure that email forwarding is not occurring and that you're not getting foreign mailbox logons, that your mailboxes are, indeed new mailboxes that are set up for auditing, things of that nature. So that security check has been a very popular service that we're looking at. And so we ask you to kind of, consider some of these things, these technologies, as part of your Office 365. Certainly can follow up with us if anything you saw there is you're interested in deploying as a project, or if you're interested in kind of offloading some of those services to have us take a look at your Office 365 security health check. It's usually a one-day affair for us to kind of go in a scripted way, go through and look at what we call 44 parameters of possible security issues. So we thank you for attending. We